All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ole Miss After Dark. Me and Hitch are back once again, and we're joined by Zach Moreth from the Rebel Walk. He is going to join us. We're going to talk a little bit about Hunter Elliott returning since that news broke on Thursday after me and Hitch ended up recording on a Tuesday, so we missed that in our show. And then Zach had a really good article earlier this week about Juice Fest before it got started going, so we can get his thoughts on that and how it's going so far this weekend. And then look ahead to the Ole Miss football season, get Zach's thoughts on that. A key stretch of games that he's looking at that might define the season a little bit for us, and just his overall thoughts on the football team before this thing gets started. Because we're less than a week away from camp actually starting, and about a month away from kickoff now. So it's almost here. We're really excited about it. So we'll start diving into all of that. But before we get started, Zach, really appreciate you joining us here today, man. How you been doing?
I'm doing great, guys. Like I said, I appreciate you having me on, and I'm ready to discuss some Ole Miss sports.
Yeah. That's what we do on this show here. It's I won't say all Ole Miss sports because we will at the very end of every one of our shows
Sometimes.
dive into some wrestling brackets and stuff like that of the best wrestlers of all time. That's one of the things that me and Hitch really love to do. I'm not sure anybody else really likes it, but it doesn't really matter as long as we have fun with it. So we still do it every week. But so let's go ahead and dive into it real quick then. Like I said, Hunter Elliott announces on Thursday that he will indeed be coming back to Ole Miss next year. Really big for this Ole Miss pitching staff getting their ace back. And if you have been following our show for the last several weeks, the couple of weeks leading up to the draft and since the draft, this isn't really a huge shock to our listeners. We've been telling y'all for a while now that I've been hearing over and over again more and more positive news about getting Elliott, Maddox, Nichols, those guys back into Oxford when we thought for sure Elliott was gone and a possibility Nichols and Maddox might have been as well. Turns out we do get all three of them back, and it really gives a shot in the arm to this Ole Miss pitching staff where we were thinking, okay, we got to go find possibly 3 weekend starters. Now you're bringing back a true ace on a Friday as long as Hunter Elliott's healthy post Tommy John. I think he's 14 months post surgery now. So obviously he has a lot of time to get geared up, get that arm back healthy and into playing shape. You get Maddox back and potentially get him off that Friday night roll where I think he can be much more effective. And then you've got a battle there for Sunday, right? Mason Nichols pitched so good there for us on Sunday. But then you've got Hudson Calhoun, who's had a really good summer. J.P. Robertson, who we interviewed last week, is going to get a chance to start as well. The pitcher from Pearl River Community College, Will McCausland from St. Joseph. A lot of options here, but let's start with Ole Miss potentially getting their ace, Friday night ace, Hunter Elliott back. What are your thoughts on that, Zach?
Yeah, this is massive news for Ole Miss baseball. It's been a really strange offseason. For 1 week, it seemed like everyone was hitting the transfer portal and the Fire Bianco chants were at an all-time high again. And then the next week, Owen Pano decides to come back. Okay, Hunter Elliott's coming back. Mason Nichols, Braden Randall, Luke Hill. So there's been some really good information despite all the bad news. And like you said, I think the weekend rotation is essentially going to be set with those three to start the season. And that's huge news. One thing I'm really looking forward to is seeing these guys work with a pitching coach in Joel Mangrum, who's developed a boatload of guys. He's taught, in the MLB, he's taught obviously across a bunch of Division I schools, but for them to have that opportunity is something they didn't have in previous years. So, how are these guys going to reach their ceiling through Coach Mangrum? I'm excited to see it unfold, guys.
Yeah, it's funny you said up and down kind of the transfer portal. I think 3 weeks in a row when we recorded Mangrum being being named the pitching coach, and I think me and Diz were both, hey, he's getting to come in here and he's not getting a bare cupboard, right? Like he's got guys like Liam Doyle, Wes Mendez, like all of these young guys that he can mold. And then the next week, me and Diz are on here going, okay, well, we're in trouble when it comes to pitching, right? Like we got the guy, but we've lost 3 of our guys that are supposed to be the guys, and then the next week we had the draft and you didn't, Riley Maddox said, I'm coming back. There were a couple of more guys that didn't get drafted high and they're coming back. And so we had this wave of, high with Mangrum being hired, low with all the pitchers going out, and then the high again, we got some pitchers coming back in. And I think what you said there about Mangrum coming in and working with these guys, I think that's going to be so important that I'm not sure a lot of baseball programs can offer his type of insight when it comes to the next level.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And especially for a guy like Hunter Elliott, he hasn't pitched in quite some time. So I think he's going to progress a lot. And I'm just looking forward to watch it happen.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that I hear people say when I mention, or when I was talking about Hunter Elliott coming back, and that was an exciting thing to me. And you had guys that are people that would say, I mean, he hadn't thrown a competitive pitch in 2 years. Yeah, but that 1 year he did throw competitive pitches. He threw them very well, right? And I understand that injuries, can limit you physically as a pitcher, but he didn't forget how to pitch just because he hurt his arm. And I think he proved that as a freshman. And he can actually, even more on top of that, I think he proved that he can handle the pressure of the SEC schedule, right? Like as a freshman, he ran through it. And so I think when he comes back out and he's on the mound on Friday night, like it just does something when that pitching staff isn't in shambles starting the season, right? You've got some guys that can handle that pressure and it feels good.
Yeah, that's kind of one thing I talked about a couple years ago, post Doug Nikhazy. Every time he took the mound, it seemed like we could score 9, 10, 11 runs every time he was on the bump. And it's because everybody was so confident in him. The offense was able to relax. They weren't pressing. And then the following year, we were really trying to find ourselves offensively, even though we had guys like Elko and Graham and Bench and Alderman and all that. But we really scuffled for a long stretch of time there because, DeLucia hadn't showed up to be the ace that he ended up being. Elliot was still pitching either midweek or out of the bullpen. He hadn't been inserted into that starting rotation. Well, lo and behold, once those two guys get a firm grasp on that Friday and Saturday night, that's when the offense takes a breath, lets loose a little bit. We start scoring a bunch of runs, and that's when we go on that incredible run to make the postseason and eventually win the national title. That's the one thing that never gets talked about enough with the pitching staff. Your hitters have to have faith in the pitchers on the mound. They have to believe in those guys and know that they don't have to go up there and score 10 or 11 runs to win every game. And by doing that, you look up and they usually do score 10 or 11 runs because they're not pressing. I think that is the big benefit we'll get this coming up year with these guys coming back. And it's not just the ones we've mentioned. Braden Jones is going to end up coming back. He's returning into the bullpen. Connor Spencer announced he's coming back, and then he got drafted. I do still anticipate Connor holding up to his word and coming back to Ole Miss, locking down the back end of that bullpen. What's really interesting to me, though, kind of like I led the show off with, is what are we going to do with Sunday? Yeah, we've got a really proven high-end Sunday guy in Mason Nichols, but Mason Nichols is also this really proven high-end back end of the bullpen guy as well, right? And if Hudson Calhoun, J.P. Robertson, Will McClausen, any of those guys can step up and grab a hold of that Sunday role and let Mason back into that bullpen, well, all of a sudden, you've got a three-headed monster with Spencer, Nichols, and Braden Jones back there. And let's not forget guys like Sam Takuyan, a guy that has electric stuff, can really pitch it well, has pitched it well this summer when he has played. That's another guy that's going to factor into this. I think we're just better suited if we find somebody besides Mason to take that Sunday role, as long as somebody can come up and grab it and allow Nichols to be in that bullpen. I think it really strengthens the overall pitching staff at that point.
No, that you nailed it on the head, Derek. And another thing, like talking about those intangibles and, the offense feeling more confident with a certain pitcher on the mound. Hunter Elliott, he pitched that last College World Series game. Like, you talk about pressure, you talk about accolades. This guy has it all. So in terms of leadership, I think he's going to be a guy that these younger pitchers are really going to look to. And not even just the pitchers, but guys all across the team. And to be honest, I don't think his voice was as heard as it needed to be last year because he clearly wasn't playing. But when you have a guy like that and that experience in the locker room, really emerging back into a role on the field, I think, his leadership's really going to start to take command with this team, and that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, and I think so.
Bring up. with
Yeah,
the
you're
with
100%
Hunter
right.
Elliott's leadership. You're not hurt as much when you're not playing often, right? Or in Hunter's case, not playing at all. But you look at this team next year, and you've got Hunter Elliott back out there with all the experience. I think he's going to bring a lot of leadership. But then you return guys, Will Furness and Luke Hill, who just really went through the battles last year and really hung in there. Ended up putting together really good years. Luke struggled to begin the year, but then comes out and hits 320 something in SEC play, right? And Will Furness is apparently the only human on the planet that can only rake against SEC pitching. Really scuffled there out of the gate, but just like his true freshman year, he got the SEC play. He hit over 300 as a true freshman in SEC play, and I think he was around 295, something like that in SEC play his sophomore year. So he really thrives against that better competition. So I think we have three real leaders that have really gone through the battles, been through the fire a little bit, so to speak. And that's really going to help this baseball club.
Yeah, you're right. And going back to Mason Nichols there for just a second, what I loved about him being the choice on Sunday last year was the fact that he has a third pitch, right? And that's what's so important when you're a reliever. You can usually get away with two, elite pitches. But when you move into that starter role, you need a third one, and Mason Nichols has it with that changeup. And so with him running through and proving that third pitch is good enough for him to be a starter in the SEC on Sunday, right? Even if we do have to move him back to the bullpen, I think that just helps him better to have more confidence in that third pitch, which is a third pitch for a reliever is unbelievable, right? And so if he's got three pitches that are working like that, you're looking at a bullpen with him and Connor Spencer, Takui, and all those other guys that are. Yeah, I know we talked about the bullpen last year, but this year may be even better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely going to be a strength of this team, I think, especially with the addition of Joel Mangrum. He's going to be able to get the most out of these guys and
No
see the
doubt.
progression of it. Just the way he works with them, the difference in philosophies. That's one thing I'm really interested to see. For the longest time, if you were a pitcher at Ole Miss, if you came in and didn't have a Doug Nikhazy curveball, it was just a middle of the road curveball. Well, that curveball got ditched, and you learned how to throw a slider after that. It had to be a Gunnar Hoagland curveball, a Doug Nikhazy. Drew Pomeranz back in the day obviously had one of the best that I'd ever seen. But if you didn't have the elite curveball, you were going to, by God, throw a slider no matter what. Interested to see if he keeps up that same thought process with some of these pitchers coming in and ones on our current roster as well. So that's something else I will definitely be keeping an eye on. But we'll go ahead and transition off of baseball here, get into Juice Fest. Huge weekend for football recruiting in Oxford, Mississippi. And as I said, Zach wrote an article for the Rebel Walk discussing visitors that were expected to show up and what to watch for. Ended up getting a pretty big commitment over the weekend, Zach, and Corey Amos. He recommits to Ole Miss, 4-star linebacker out of Louisiana. What can you tell me so far about Juice Fest and how it's gone so far over the weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was obviously the main, commitment of the weekend. Corey Amos, he was committed to Ole Miss for a pretty long time. And then last month, I believe he decommitted in the midst of that crazy week when Ole Miss had like 4 decommitments. Very strange. But we got Amos back, and the immediate player that comes to mind for me is Suntarine Perkins in terms of a comparison. Amos, 6'2", 6'3", 205 pounds. He has some weight to gain, but he's very lengthy. And again, he's really physical and fast. So I wouldn't be surprised if they put some weight on him and put him off the edge like they do with Perkins. Some other visitors I do want to point out is wide receiver Dylan Alfred. Again, committed to Ole Miss, decommitted in the same week that Corey Amos did last month. But so then I guess Alfred decides to show up for Juice Fest. So now it's like, okay. And then you see Calvin Bolden and then you see George McDonald tweeting all these different things. You start to pick up that it looks like Alfred's kind of down between Ole Miss and Clemson, which is kind of a curveball when a kid decommits because he usually doesn't go back to that same school. But it looks like that could be a reality. And he's a really, really talented player. I do think he'll end up at Ole Miss. He trains with Mike Espy all the time. He's from Mississippi. I think he'll end up, again, as a Rebel. Another huge name, Caleb Cunningham, was at Juice Fest. He's currently committed to Alabama, but he's from Ackerman, Mississippi. He's a 5-star player, one of those freak athletes who you go watch him play, he's the best player on the field. And again, I don't think his recruitment's anywhere close to being done. I know he was planning on attending Auburn's recruiting weekend a little earlier in this week. Now that didn't happen, but again, a guy who's committed to Alabama, who's planning on attending an Auburn event and then goes to an Ole Miss event, it tells you all you need to know right there. And then kind of the last guy out of the 2025 class who I wanted to highlight is Shakai Mills-Knight. He's a running back out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. He goes to Baylor School, which is where current offensive lineman Bryson Sanders went. So I do think there's some pull there, a little bit of a connection. But this kid's 6'2", 210 pounds, just a beast. He's a high 4-star, and he's going to be one of those guys he has to come in. He'll probably end up playing right away. He has like 210 pounds. Like, this kid's not even in college yet. So he's big. He's fast.
6'2", 210.
Yeah, he's a force. And it was tough because Kylan Deere, he was the 5-star running back who was previously committed. And fans were, again, up in arms when he decommitted. He's a 5-star. He's from Mississippi. But now you get a guy like Mills-Knight. He's a little more under the radar. But again, in that Ole Miss offense, I think he can do just as much amount of damage as a Kylan Deere would have. So those are the main guys for the 2025 class. But, I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the whole Corey Amos situation and any other recruits you were thinking about too.
Well, again, Zach wrote this article. If you haven't read it, I read it yesterday, and it's a very good article. My favorite part about the whole thing, though, and you brought it up, is the fact that Caleb Cunningham felt like he needed to tweet, "I will not be at Big Cat this weekend."
Yes,
that's just I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it is. The whole time you were talking and you mentioned it, I just started smiling because it's so hilarious that he's just like, "No, I'm good. I won't be going there." But I need to let everybody in the world know that I'm not going to Auburn.
Exactly.
So
I think that tells you all you need to know. This, I don't think his recruitment's anywhere close to being done.
No. Yeah, and that's kind of the world of recruiting right now in 2026. You're in July. Basically, a commitment doesn't mean really anything. Now, you'd rather him be committed to your school than committed somewhere else, obviously. But in this NIL era and everything else, nothing is done until they sign that piece of paper in December. So, Cunningham is definitely a guy that I've kept my eye on. That's one that obviously we would love to pull Lankiff and would love to have him in Oxford in that offense. He could really, really do some special things. And I'm sure Lane is hammering the fact of, I've coached guys like Amari Cooper and Julio Jones, Reggie Bush, all of these elite offensive players that's gone on to do great things, not only at the college level, but the NFL level. And I'm sure Lane Kiffin's salivating at the fact of the possibility of him being in Oxford, him getting to draw up plays for him. One thing Lane's always been good at, and he tells you up front, so it's not a surprise every time you see it on a Saturday, is my job is to get the best players the ball. I believe in playmakers. I believe in the best players on the field, get the ball and let them do what they do best. And that's one thing that Lane has always done a really good job of. Going back to Corey Amos real quick, though, that was obviously a nice shot in the arm for the recruiting class, especially on the defensive side of the ball at linebacker. It's a position that you have seen us put an emphasis on these last couple of years. We've really built some nice depth there over those last couple of years. I think we're in pretty good shape going into this year. The Suntarine Perkins comp is that seems like a really good one. Just the way you laid it out from a size standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint. Me and Hitch talked about Perkins a little bit on our last show, just about how great he is at going and getting the ball right. Everything else out of the equation, about having to read the offense, figure out where he needs to get in pass coverage, stuff like that. Look at him, say, go get the ball, whether that be running back, quarterback, whatever it is. If you just let him put his head down and get after it, he's as dangerous as anybody coming off the edge there. So that would obviously be a big boost to get Amos in the boat. And really starting to look next year, if you're able to pair him and Perkins together on each side, having that coming off each side of the line, at the same time, or if you just stagger them and keep them fresh all throughout the game. That's where the depth comes in to play there, which we have really lacked here the last couple of years. But again, something we've done a really good job of building up leading into this really big 2024 football season that has such high expectations. We'll go ahead and dive into that right now. What's kind of your thoughts on this upcoming football season, Zach? What are you looking for out of the Rebels?
I mean, we mentioned it a little bit before the podcast, but it's this 2-game stretch that I'm looking at on the road at South Carolina and on the road at LSU. Ole Miss it's their first road game. Okay, they play on the road at Wake Forest, but that's a stadium that holds about 30,000 people. So now they're going into an SEC game in a stadium that holds about 80,000 people. And I don't know if you guys have seen this, but South Carolina fans really don't like Juice Wells.
Yeah, they don't at all.
Like
South Carolina is not an easy place to go play either, right? Like it doesn't get talked about, like it does like Death Valley or other places. But I mean, truly, like South Carolina sucks like to go up there and play.
100%. No, yeah. So one of my teachers for one of my sports classes was Kevin Norwood, and he played wide receiver at Alabama. He said, to this day, I think the toughest place I ever played was at South Carolina. So
I believe he was probably on that Alabama team that went up there and got beat by what was his name? Stephen Garcia, the quarterback for South Carolina.
Stephen Garcia. Wow.
100%.
Wasn't that his name?
Marcus Lattimore. What was it? Back name Marcus Lattimore was the
name. Marcus Lattimore was on another planet before he ripped up his knee, man. One of the best running backs I ever saw. But yeah, South Carolina's incredibly tough. Lord, just as that 2010 Ole Miss team when we rolled in there on a Thursday night and Eric Norwood just whipped poor old Bradley Sowell from one end of the field to the other. I mean, over and over and over again. I'd never seen such a dejected man as I did Bradley Sowell that night. But look, and a fun little story. I didn't even realize this till a few weeks ago. I read it. Did y'all realize that Sandstorm, the pregame festivities they had at South Carolina, that started that Thursday night when Ole Miss visited? That's the first time they ever did
it. No, I didn't know that.
Same.
I didn't either. Yeah. So you're welcome, South Carolina. Lay off Juice Wells. We gave you all that incredible environment. So I don't want to hear any more from you.
You're welcome. I remember that game. Okay. Like I remember being in my apartment in Tupelo and being so excited for that game to come on. Who did we got? We got Vault.
Yeah, it was Vault. He just got done with his lunch. Want to make sure he could have some cookies, So he was
Vault, go get some cookies, buddy.
Oh, that's what I told him. Go eat all the cookies. Don't matter. But yeah, that South Carolina game, though, Zach, to your point, that's the first huge test, I feel. Like I said, Wake Forest, we do go on the road there. I expect us to handle business there. Right. Then we play Georgia Southern at home, Kentucky at home, which is always a little tricky. You know exactly what you're going to get out of Bob Stoops and the Wildcats. But again, that being at home, I expect Ole Miss to take care of business there. Agreed. And then, like I said, huge stretch at South Carolina, at LSU. If you're able to win those two games right there, and then you look up and these other games, you should go to Fayetteville and you should handle them easily. You should go to the Swamp and you should be able to handle them, and you should be able to handle State in the Egg Bowl. That leaves you with two home games, Oklahoma, and then a couple weeks after that, Georgia coming into town. But to your point, why you think, and me and Hitch are on the same page as well, the South Carolina and LSU game is so big is because if you can take care of business there, really takes the pressure off with those two huge home games coming up the following weeks after that.
Exactly, Derek. And, it doesn't sound like a good thing to say, but if you win at South Carolina and at LSU, I guess you can afford to lose against Georgia. I don't like saying that, but if you lose against LSU, like pressure, it becomes a whole new level because now, you don't know where other teams stand. Can we afford to lose that second game? So all these different types of questions start creeping in. That's why in Death Valley, it's going to be insanely packed. I'm looking forward to watching it just because the environment's going to be crazy. I'm not sure if I'm going to be in attendance. I'm a little scared. But again, it's going to be a good game, and I'm really looking forward to it. This offense has to go out and set the tone. just like last year, and hopefully Pete Golding comes with a little bit of a better defensive plan.
Well, you got to think LSU's got revenge on the mind too, right? I mean,
Yes.
I mean, Ole Miss LSU is I'm not going to say it's like that every year, but it is heightened. Like tensions are heightened in the game every year.
Mm-hmm.
Last year felt a little bit different. Like it felt extra heightened, with the way the scoring was back and forth. And so you got to think this coming up year, unlike previous years when Ole Miss has beaten LSU, that LSU's going to be out for some blood. Brian Kelly wants that game back, I think.
For sure.
And
go ahead.
And LSU breaking in a new quarterback with Nussmeier, really talented kid. Hasn't started in the SEC quite yet outside of their bowl game last year since Daniel sat out. Was really impressive in that bowl game, but it's a guy that we know is talented that we saw in mop up. And then, like I said, the bowl game previously. But I think he's a really, really good quarterback. He's going to have a really good year for LSU. Definitely can't afford to overlook the Tigers just because they have a new starting quarterback. And I also have a hard time believing their defense is going to be as bad as it was last year. That was a historically bad LSU defense. If there's one thing you can always count on, it's that the Tigers are going to play defense, and they're damn sure going to do it in Death Valley. So the Rebels are going to have their hands full when they roll in there that night.
It's going to be insane. And it's it feels like a must-win type of game. But I just hope, again, let's just hope Ole Miss can take care of business when they play Kentucky and South Carolina, so we can even get to that point. But they should, so I guess we'll see.
Yeah. And then after that, that's kind of when we start talking about Oklahoma at home, at Arkansas, Georgia at home, at Florida, a team that might not even have a head coach at that point by the time we get to that part of the season.
You are so low on Florida.
And dude, how can you not be low on Florida? Have you seen their schedule?
I don't know if I've ever seen anybody as low on a team as you are on Florida this year. It's crazy.
They're going to go 3-9 this year. Okay. Maybe 1-7 in the SEC. I mean, I just don't. I can't find wins on that schedule. It is brutal, man. You play Miami, you play Florida State. I mean, Georgia. Obviously, it's just unbelievable over and over and over again. All the teams that they have to play, AD should be fired immediately for setting that up. There's no way they should have to do that. But I think the Rebels are in good shape, though, after we get through that little bit of a stretch. And so what's kind of your prediction for the season, Zach? What record are you looking for here for the Rebels?
Yeah, so if I'm being honest, I think the only loss is going to come against Georgia. I think, there's a bunch of – an injury could happen here or there, whatever, but I think man-to-man, Ole Miss, this roster is up there for maybe top 3 in the nation. I mean, you look at size, speed, experience, leadership, all these different things. Like, they really do have it all. And this coaching staff is one of the best in the nation, and they're bringing a ton of experience with them as well, especially in close games and high-pressure situations. So, for me, I would say the only loss comes against Georgia, but I wouldn't even rule that game out yet. I think there's a good chance Ole Miss can show up to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium and win that game. But what are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I think if Georgia rolls into Vaught-Hemingway and Ole Miss is undefeated, I mean, look, I don't want to bring back an old, but I mean, get your popcorn out, right? Like, because this game's fixing to be nuts. I think I build in another loss in there. I think 10 wins, right? Like, I think that it is going to be very difficult to go to South Carolina win, to LSU win, to Arkansas and win, to Florida and win, right? Like, it feels like a lot of our road games this year are games that we struggle with. Like, we struggle going to Arkansas. Like that. Like, I know Did said it before, and I say it too a lot. It's like, we should go up there and take care of business. But I know when that Saturday comes, I'm going to be worried about that game because we are terrible against Arkansas. So for that, I'm with you. I think that we could. I don't like to say I'm chalking up a win, to Georgia here, but I think if you want to be realistic about it, I think that's probably the one game I look at and say, yeah, we lose that game. And then I'm building in another loss because I'm an Ole Miss fan forever, and I know that I probably ought to be safe with it.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm more in line with Zach. I'm looking for the Rebels to go 11-1. I've got us losing to Georgia. Um, Me and Hitch did this episode. It's been probably about a month ago now, where we went through every SEC team schedule to kind of
Oh
try
yeah.
to get an idea of how many potential playoff teams there could be in the SEC. And I ended up finding 7 teams that could go 10-2 pretty easily. Like
Oh
it
gosh.
wasn't much of a stretch for me to get 7 teams at 10-2. And that's all at the same time, right? It's not like,
Jeez.
well, if you switch this game, then this team could get to 10, or if you switch this one. I mean, it was all in line to where 7 teams could have gone at least 10-2. And then I think I had Tennessee at like 9-3, so that's 8 teams with 9 wins. I had Georgia at 12-0. I had Ole Miss and Texas tied at 11-1 for second place in the SEC. Both teams losing to Georgia, obviously,
Uh-huh.
to get to that 11-1. But look, it's just an incredibly difficult league, as it always is. The good thing for Ole Miss is we call it as big of a break as you can catch in the SEC. Yeah, we go to LSU, but you look, your other difficult games. Oklahoma's at home, Georgia's at home. The rivalry game with Mississippi State, where most of the times anything can happen. I think that probably changes this year. I think we probably beat them
Agreed.
pretty good, but that one's at home as well, right? It's that South Carolina game. It's the one that I'm going to talk about all the way up until that thing kicks off. That's going to just have me worried to death. But overall, pretty favorable schedule for the Rebels. So I'm looking for us to go 11-1, host a playoff game. Uh, Honestly, I don't really want us to go to the SEC championship game. The way the format is now, all you're doing is building in an extra game when you're going to have to go through this tournament style to get all the way to the national
I
championship. If
agree.
you're going to let me host a playoff game, then there's no reason for me to go play an SEC championship and potentially get knocked out of hosting a playoff game right there. So I would rather just
Or
not have to play that
somebody
thing.
get injured, right? Jenny,
Yeah,
what's up?
injuries, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I thought about when you
go on.
started talking about, building in that extra game was,
Yeah.
you don't want somebody of like Jackson Dart, right? Like, I mean, it happened with Matt Corral, right? He got hurt right before the bowl game. And
Or he
that's
got
not,
hurt in the Sugar Bowl.
it may be in the Sugar Bowl, right? It wasn't the SEC, championship, but you don't want to take that chance of one of your key players getting hurt, and you having to run Luke Altmaier out there. That ain't what you're looking for. So I'm kind of with you there. I think as important as it used to be, when we were younger, and I think it's probably losing importance now, the conference championships, with the way that it's expanding with nationally. Selfishly, young me says, no, I want Ole Miss to win an SEC championship, right? But the realistic side of me is like, well, I don't need that, right? If I can get the big one, if I can get the big national championship, I don't need the conference championship. Y'all can keep that one. So yeah, I'm with you, Diz. I like that.
1,000%. And the last thing I'll touch on here is if Ole Miss, let's say that obviously they play Georgia in the regular season, then they play Georgia in the SEC championship. And then if you have to play Georgia a third time in the play, it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
That's a great point, actually.
Yeah, it is. I actually didn't even think of it that way, where you could play the best team in the country 3 separate times, right?
Yeah.
Nobody else in the country is going to be able to say that. It'll pretty much be us and Texas, and I think Alabama plays them in the regular season too. Georgia has a brutal schedule, man. That they're having to play the other 3 best teams in the SEC this coming up year in the regular season. Going to end up meeting one of them again in the SEC championship game, most likely, if it all goes chalk, and more than likely going to run into one of those 3 again in the playoffs too. This is going to be fascinating to see how the first year of this expanded playoff ends up playing out. Something I kind of thought about while y'all two were talking about the SEC championship game, not wanting to go to it and all that. It's a lot like a baseball team getting into Hoover. If you've got your spot locked up in a regional or something like that, you don't want to be burning your pitching all week and weekend in Hoover for an SEC championship that really doesn't matter, right? Get in there, lose your game, lose your 2 games, whatever it is, which goes in single elimination is coming up here. So go lose your 1 game, get out of there, start resting up, get ready for the postseason. It's just interesting. You can now apply that line of thinking to college football because that's so foreign to this sport. But I think it's something that you're going to start seeing this coming up year, though.
And look, Lane Kiffin is such an agent of chaos. I look up and admire him for being an agent of chaos so much. I probably should say that recorded. But I could see him like turning down the invitation to the SEC championship game, right? Like if we get there and Lane Kiffin being like, "I'm good. Give it to the next one," right? Like, I mean, on Twitter, right? And then he does it with Juice. He does it with Juice, looking up at him like, "Dad, I really want to go to Atlanta." And Lane's like, "No, we're saving our players. Whatever, you know." I can see him doing that. That'd be really funny.
No, I wouldn't put anything past Lane, but again,
Never.
I'm really looking forward to this season, guys. I mean, I haven't been a lifelong Ole Miss fan, but from the sounds of it, there's never really been a season with this much anticipation. So it should be good.
It's been building, right? Like the past 3 seasons, we've said that. The past 3 seasons, we've said, man, there really haven't been a season like this in at least in a long time, probably in my lifetime. Well, all the way back to Eli, right? We won 10 games with Eli, didn't we? 3.
Yeah, but you lost to Memphis, lost to Texas Tech, and then that LSU game there that keeps you from going to Atlanta. So it was different in the sense that you still weren't playing for anything besides an SEC championship because you weren't going to the BCS with losses against Memphis and Texas Tech on your resume already leading
but
into that.
It's just been building. Like it feels like a tsunami or a tidal wave that's been building the past 2 or 3 years. It's been like, man, we've never been here. We're looking forward to it. And then this year, it really feels like, hey, we've got. And you said it a minute ago, Zach. On this roster, you've got experience, you've got talent, you've got proven guys. Like you've got all of the pieces. The one thing that we don't know is like how are they gelling together, right? Yeah. And we know from previous years, this coaching staff is very good at doing that. And so I'm so excited about this season, ready for it to kick off. And as much as that South Carolina game scares me, I can't wait to get there and play it. Like that's I wish we could just I want to go play that game right now. But like I said, I kind of in line with you guys on the expectations. I just still got that one extra loss in there that worries me. But I think we do make it to the playoff, and I think it would be very awful if we had to play Georgia 3 times that. So I appreciate you for putting that in my head, make me think that.
Yeah, because that's all I'm going to be able to think about from now on is the rematch and then the third rematch with Georgia on down the line. But look, if that's how it ends up playing out and that's what we got to do, then I'll
go out there and whip their ass 3 times.
Because that means we will be playing in Atlanta and we'll be playing in Atlanta again, more than likely for a national championship up against them. So if that's what it comes down to, that'll be a lot of fun, and we'll just kick their ass 3 times and get our ass on back home after that. So really looking forward to that. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Zach, really appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, man.
And your insight, especially with Juice Fest. Kind of like I had said earlier, me and Hitch have we kind of keep up with it as much as we can, but just from a recruiting standpoint, we needed to get brought up to speed a little bit. So really appreciate you doing that for Zach and your insight on football season and baseball as well. And Hitch, obviously appreciate you every single time you're on here. And we will go ahead and end it there, and we will talk to y'all again next week. Zach, Hitch, y'all have a good one, guys. And hi, Josh.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Zach. Have a good one. Shout out, got good speed.